And we're live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're live. I assume. I hope. We're alive. We're one live. Yeah. We're always waiting for me. We're always waiting. I can be heard. Yeah, okay, good. That's all I need. Well, we haven't done this in a while. It's been a while since we did this, but we're gonna continue because we're almost finished. Almost finished with this. Uh, if you're asking me if people are gonna ask me to remember what the fucking to explain the previous chapter before this, the answer is I can't off the top of my head. I was looking at the chapters and I was like, I had vague ideas about what things meant and what things were referring to, but I wasn't exactly sure. So I didn't want to just say some stuff and get it wrong. So I'll just explain as I go along. I'll just explain as I go along, as it goes along. And if anyone has any questions, we can answer those. We can just answer that. We have around 40 pages left of the book. We might get through this chapter today if I'm enjoying it, if I'm feeling it, but we might not. So, hello Ninja. You can ask any questions you want, any questions you need answering, and I can explain. I'll try to explain as we go along. But if you have any questions and I gloss over something, glaze over something, I'll answer. Exploring common worlds. Through construction, the collective feeds on what remains outside, which it has not yet collected. But how can we talk about that which escapes it entirely? Earlier, it would have been defined as a mix of nature and societies. Oh my god, people are messaging me. Yay! Sunday posted it. Sunday posted it this time. I was like, who's messaging me? Who's interrupting me? Who's derailing me? And it was Sunday. But it was good. Good Sunday. All right, I'll restart because we literally just did. I literally just read a sentence. Through construction, the collective feeds on what remains outside, which it has not yet collected. But how can we talk about that which escapes it entirely? We're gonna stop quite a bit here so I can explain everything. What is the collective? What is this inside? And what is this outside? How is Latour doing this? Some of you who were here for previous things might remember. Some of you might who might have been here might not, and some of you might be entirely new, and so you have no fucking clue what Latour's talking about. The collective, what's that? Inside and outside. What does he mean by that? Inside, outside, what? What does it mean to be outside the collective? For Latour, when he is talking about society, so to speak, is how I'm going to say it. He means something quite differently, and he wants to replace society with the notion of the collective. I can actually probably just go to the glossary, and that might actually help a little bit, just for everyone, so you can see it, and just to make sure that I'm doing okay too. But the collective is basically it is humans and non-humans together. It's kind of the thing. It's really hard and very interesting, and I forget exactly how It functions, but that's why we can just pull this up. Let's see. To be distinguished, first of all, from society, yes. Society, old notion. It's a term that refers to a bad distribution of powers. It accumulates the old powers of nature in society in a single enclosure before it is differentiated once again into distinct powers. The power to take into account, the power to put in order, the power to follow up. Inside of its use in the singular, the term refers not to an already established unit, but to a procedure for collecting associations of humans and non-humans. Latour is a sociologist, or as he says, better yet, an asociologist, uh, which is the studying of associations. And these associations need not refer simply to humans, but also everything else we interact with. Latour, in one of his earlier essays that I'm almost certain is before this, talks about how the non-humans around us, even like the simplest ones, like the door closer, like literally the thing that automatically closes the door behind you, it inscribes, it has morals. It gives humans morals. It gives us there is a morality inscribed in it. And the door closer gives those morals back to humans, reminds them of certain things. In the door closer's case, it's keep the door shut. Don't let the heat out. Don't let the cold in, or don't let the cold out. Don't let the heat in. It's what the door closer does. Basically. Yeah. Also that. Please close the door quietly. There's in what is this inside and outside? So for Latour, when he's talking about the inside and outside, he's talking specifically outside the collective. There are things we have not taken up yet. There are these things that we have rejected. Usually, we have pushed them outside of the collective. It's not that they're there waiting to be discovered. It's that they have been rejected by us. They have not been accepted. And so they're put outside the collective. But they can just as easily be taken back in. And there's this sense you get with Latour that he does want to take everything in. Quite literally. I think I was joking one time and say that Latour's philosophy is the philosophy of a hoarder. He wants to take everything within the collective. He has this notion of the a cosmos, the good common world, which is not really something that I think he necessarily thinks is possible, but it's very very interesting. He plays with things in a lot of weird ways. I hope that made sense. There's a lot to this. There's a lot to this book, and we're on the final chapter. So people who weren't already here to watch, it's like there's quite a bit to this. And it's also been a bit since I read this, and I'm just kind of going off what I remember and what I'm reading again. Earlier, it would have been defined as a mix of nature and societies. Nature unified the primary qualities in a single, homogeneous furnishing. The cultures regrouped the diversity of the secondary qualities in as many incommensurable aggregates. What are primary and secondary qualities? If I remember right, primary qualities are those qualities that are deemed quite literally primary. They're literally given they matter. They're supposed to matter. Well, as secondary qualities are all those things that they don't really matter, but they do still exist. I can actually look up in the glossary to make sure I'm getting that right. Let's see. What I think I went to 250. Primary qualities. Primary qualities as opposed to secondary qualities. Traditional expression in philosophy to distinguish the fabric of which the world is made, particles, atoms, genes, neurons, and so on, as opposed to representations, colors, sounds, feelings, and so on. Primary qualities are invisible but real and never experienced subjectively. Secondary qualities visible but not essential and are experienced subjectively. Far from being an obvious division, it is this operation of, in parentheses, political epistemology par excellence that is undone by experimental metaphysics and forbidden by the new constitution. Um, what is, just for reference, there are going to be two terms that might be confusing to some of you who are new, and that is, in air quotes, political epistemology and political epistemology. What is political epistemology? I actually forget how he defines that, but in air quotes, political epistemology is quite easy. Um, it's it is an epistemology that seems to reject politics while also inserting politics into itself. I can probably just look it up. It's probably right here. Yeah. It might be political ecology that is the term that he uses. Why is political epistemology not here? Um, I'm so confused. I'm so confused. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it in the thing? I can't find it. Yeah, we're gonna be stopping and going quite a bit because I have to explain quite a bit. Um, I feel. Thankfully, Latour was so nice, and he provides a glossary for all of his turns. And some of them are good, and some of them fucking suck. They're fucking terrible definitions. They do not make sense at all. It's an ease. Epistemology, in air quotes, political epistemology, and political epistemology. In the proper sense of the term, epistemology refers to the study of the sciences and the procedures for such study, like science studies, but with different instruments. In contrast, I use the term political, in air quotes, political epistemology, or less kindly, epistemology police, to designate the distorting of theories of knowledge in order to rationalize politics, but without respecting the procedures for coordination either of the sciences or of politics. It is a matter of engaging in politics in a way that is protected from all politics, hence the parentheses. Finally, I use the term political epistemology without parentheses to designate the analysis of the explicit distribution of powers between sciences and politics in the framework of the Constitution. What is this Constitution? The Constitution is a set of guarantees that exist within the collective. There was the old Constitution, also called the modern Constitution. You might call it another term in this, but I'm pretty sure the term he refers to it as is the modern Constitution, which was the separation. The modern Constitution is the separation of first of all, society in nature. Society is said to be separate from nature in this way. It's one of the big things. One of the big things that Latour kind of goes after in a lot of this. And there's other stuff. We'll just stick with that. It's the separation of society from nature. A lot of the other stuff stems from that, but it's kind of that. That's what the old Constitution was. And we can actually, let's just go. Maybe the Constitution is in here. Term borrowed from law and political science, used here in a broader metaphysical sense, since it refers to the division of beings into humans and non-humans, objects and subjects, into the type of power and ability to speak, mandate, and will that they receive. Unlike the term culture, constitution refers to things as well as to persons. Unlike the term structure, it points to the willful, explicit, spelled-out character of this apportionment. To dramatize the contrast, I set the old, modern Constitution in opposition to the new Constitution of political ecology. The way of the old regime in French history is set in opposition to the Republic. Yes, the old Constitution, the modern Constitution, refers to a specific way of speaking about things that separates groups of people, things, everything in a particular way, and this is how it's supposed to be talked about. And that is, I think, all I need to say for right now. If people have any questions, I can answer. Back to what primary and secondary qualities are. Primary qualities are those qualities that are they matter. They're said to matter. They are atoms, things, and they don't expect and they don't interact really with subjective experience. Secondary qualities are the things that don't matter. They are non-essential, but they do interact with the subjective experience. And so, continuing, we'll reread that sentence again. We'll actually read the sentence before it as well. Earlier, it would have been defined as a mix of nature in societies. Nature unified the primary qualities in a single, homogeneous furnishing. The cultures regrouped the diversity of the secondary qualities in as many incommensurable aggregates. If the unified universe of nature had nothing to do with humans, it was still possible to bring peace to many disunified cultures by falling back on the one nature. At least one question seemed to have been resolved, that of the plurality of inhabited worlds. Yet neither mononaturalism nor multiculturalism can continue to sum up the risky situation in which the collective, as I have defined it, now finds itself. Mononaturalism is pretty simple. It's the idea that there is one nature. Latour doesn't believe there is one nature. Multinaturalism, as I think what he literally calls it, in opposition to it, there is not nature, there are natures. Just like there isn't a single culture, there's cultures. It's the plural. It's Latour, in a lot of his insistence, it's always on the plural. There would be too many indisputable essences on the one hand, too many arbitrary identities on the other. I have no solution other than to pursue my obstinate effort to discover whether or not a successor to this traditional compromise, one nature, multiple cultures, exists somewhere by raising a seemingly strange question. How many other collectives are there? Latour has actually talked about the collective in almost the singular, as if there's only one up to this point, which is why this question right now is actually important. What he's saying here is kind of important, and it's actually going to answer some questions that if you go to my last streams, my previous streams, you might be asking as it goes along. But yeah, any questions though, feel free to ask. Doesn't matter. You can go as slow or as fast as you guys want it. If you need me to slow down or something, I can do that as well. So don't feel free. Feel free to speak up. If it were surrounded by essences and identities, the collective would succumb at once. It would become a society. It must provide an environment for itself that is completely different from the environment of a culture surrounded by nature, by becoming sensitive to the whole that has not yet been collected and that harbors all those which it has excluded and which can appeal to be recognized again as present. What is the appeal? The appeal is so within the new constitution there are 6 processes, but we'll focus on the first 4. There is the power of perplexity. There's the question of how many are we, and how we are to be arranged, I think, is the second one. These are the two things, and in it there is perplexity, which is asking what makes us up. Fuck, I already forget them. It's been so long. It's been like several months, and I've been reading so much other shit. We can just read all this. We can just read all this. I forget that he literally explains it, so it's easy. I can just do it. Power to take account. Answer the question, how many are we? Perplexity, to meet the requirement of external reality. Investigation into the best way of detecting propositions that are candidates for existence, making them visible, and getting them to talk. Consultation, to meet the requirement of relevance. Investigation into the best means for constituting the jury capable of judging the effects of each proposition on the habits of the others. And then the lower house, power to arrange in rank order, answers the question, can we live together? To meet the requirement of publicity. Investigation into the contradictory scenarios that gradually make it possible to compose an optimal hierarchy. Institution, to meet the requirement of closure. Investigation into the means to be used to stabilize the inside and the outside of the collective. And then there's a thing to this. But there can always be an appeal. If we move something outside the collective, if we say it does not exist or it needs to be pushed out or whatever, there is always an appeal process. It's always, we can say, we failed its due process. There's more evidence. Something more came to the table, and we can say, bring it back if we need to, or we can at least have another trial, so to speak, to continue using the political and often legal metaphors that Latour uses. Yeah, okay. Yeah. To succeed in carrying out the impossible task of composing the common world, the Deimos had grown accustomed to waiting for the help from on high of science. In the absence of in capital S science, as opposed to lowercase s sciences. That's another opposition. In the absence of an appeal to the other world, public life seemed likely to cave in on itself. To keep the assemblies from constantly yielding to arbitrariness, contradiction, violence, and dispersion, we had been led to believe that we had to support them, shore them up on solid buttresses that no human hand could soil. How could we have imagined that the impossibility of calming public life derived precisely from the help offered by reason? The medicine was killing the patient. By changing its exteriority, the new notion of collective I am putting forward profoundly modifies the type of transcendence in the shadow of which political philosophy has always agreed to live. If there are indeed countless transcendences, the multitude of propositions that knock on the door, there is no longer the unified transcendence capable of putting an end to the logria of public assemblies. Politics is no longer threatened by that sword of Damocles, consisting of salvation brought by reason. Propositions. Okay, so Latour will talk about essences in this. What Latour does not mean is something static when he talks about essences. Essences are things that are instituted by the collective. They come from, they're at first propositions. Things that aren't, I should just go to the, I'm not going to be able to explain this well since I haven't read this in a while. And he's doing a lot of things that are a lot different with this than his other stuff. So I should just go. In its ordinary sense in philosophy, the term designates a statement that may be true or false. It is used here in a metaphysical sense to designate not a being of the world or linguistic form, but an association of humans and non-human before it becomes a full-fledged member of the collective, an instituted essence. Rather than being true or false, a proposition in this sense may be well or badly articulated. Unlike statements, propositions insist on the dynamics of the collective in search of good articulation, the good cosmos. To avoid repetition, I sometimes say entities or things. But this is what he means when he's talking about propositions. In essence, essences are instituted. They are for Latour. When he's talking about he's talked about it. He will often say instituted because it's important that they're instituted. They are not something that's certain. Essences for Latour can actually change. As odd as that probably sounds, but they are not a static thing. They are something that may be made static. But that doesn't mean they have to stay static, I guess, so to speak. Political philosophy has never stopped trying to find out what type of rationality could put an end to civil wars. From the city of God to the social contract, from the social contract to the gentle bonds of commerce, as Adam Smith puts it, from economics to the ethics of discussion, from morality to the defense of nature, politics has always had to make honorable amends for the lack of reason characteristic of human beings threatened by quarrels. Even when thinkers less obsessed with transparency are wilier in their approach, such to define a domain proper to politics, they always did so by making too many assumptions about the native inferiority of that simple cleverness. In seeking to avoid the diktats of the epistemology police, they continued to obey them, for they were defining politics as twisted, violent, limited, Machiavellian, virtuous in its own way, perhaps, but radically incapable, alas, of acceding to the lively clarity of knowledge. And then we'll go to the footnote. What page am I on? I don't know. Oh, we're close. Even when J.G.A. Pocock, in his classic monumental work, rehabilitates Machiavelli and the tradition he represents, he always does so, at best, by representing Machiavelli as the descendant of Aristotle, accepting as a consequence that political skill remains infinitely removed from epistemology. Sure, good, buddy. That's all I have to say to that. 184. I don't remember what page we were on, but I'll figure it out later. I'll remember it later. As a result, no one defining politics has ever accorded it a treatment, and even less a mission, equal to that of reason. Recognizing a narrow niche for real politique alongside capital S science and nature politique still does not put the sciences and politics to work on the same building. We are still speaking of the politics of reality, of realistic politics. We are still not speaking of the politics of reality, of realistic politics, of real politics. Instead of being rehabilitated, politics has been increasingly neutralized. Sorry, I should actually probably explain something. For Latour, there are technically 5 groups of people, but he's only talked about 4 so far. He will talk about the 5th in this chapter, as he says earlier in the book. There are politicians, scientists, economists, and moralists, and they each have different jobs. It's not clear that these all have to be entirely separated. The answer for me is almost certainly no, they don't have to be entirely separated. I don't think Latour would, but he's just explaining the work that goes into each of these. Sorry, I got added. Okay. He's just explaining the work that needs to go into these. The work that, the jobs that each of these people have. And, but even though they all have different jobs, they're still working on the same thing. Politicians, scientists, economists, and moralists are all interested in the work of bringing things into the collective, of working within the collective, working on the collective, so to speak. they're not engaged in a separate building. They're not separated in that way. So yeah, I hope that made sense. Also, oh no, that's actually fine. Oh, wait, let me actually make sure it actually is fine. I just realized. Okay, it is fine. Okay, good, 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 good. Hello, Dark FBK. Instead of being rehabilitated, politics has been increasingly neutralized. Transfusing capital S science into the collective amounted to pumping out more rapidly still the little blood it had left. And then footnote 2, we're on 186, and I think we're on, so that means we're on 286, I think. No. No, that's not what that means. We're on 279. On all these metaphors for the political body, see the analysis of Gorgias in Latour 1999b, chapter 7 and 8. This is Pandora's Hope, the name of my server. It's Pandora's Hope. That's what this is. Pandora's Hope is such a good name for. I really love. It's a. I need to read Pandora's Hope. It's the intro. The reason why I chose it is because the intro is very beautiful. Very, very beautiful. Contrary to the threats of, in parentheses, political epistemology, the Demos did not suffer from a lack of capital S science, but from an excess of it. This result appears paradoxical only to those who depict the collective in the somber colors of society plunge into the obscurity of representations. But as we have now understood, politics does not resemble the prison of the social any more than the sciences resemble capital S science. Politics can be no more reduced to mere immanence than capital S science can offer the succor of its transcendence. The moralists never tire of contrasting relations based on reason with relations based on force, the force of a convincing argument with that of a gun held to the head, as if that opposition were the only important one, the one that had to be preserved to protect against dissolution into anarchy. We recognize in this impossible scenography of reason against force, right against might, the old principles of the separations of powers. In the old separation of powers, the separation was between facts versus values for Latour. In the new one, it is between taking into account and putting in order. Is how he does it. In the new Constitution, the difference between relations based on force and relations based on reasons counts for much less than the distinction between enemies and appellants, between the current stage of the collective and its recollection in the next round. Those that have been rejected as enemies, either by the argument that condemns them to definitive rationality or by the pistols that kill definitively, will return in any event to haunt the collective at the next stage. The only difference that matters now comes from the following question. Who are you capable of absorbing and rejecting? You can make enemies insignificant. You can even definitively refuse to hear them out, but you will only be postponing the moment when you will see them coming back, augmenting the arrears of the collective. I don't know what that word means. Maybe I heard it before, but I don't know what it means. Arrears, meaning money that is owed and should have been paid earlier. Oh, behind with paying money that is owed, having a lower score week. Okay, so it's okay, yeah. He's doing his thing where you have to pay everything in full. Yeah. If you invented that immense theater of right and might just to avoid having the knife put to your throat, then you can surely be better and more securely protected against arbitrariness by a constitution that would accept no shortcuts, and especially not that of reason. One of the things Latour is arguing with his new constitution, with a lot of the things he does, is that it is that there is no shortcuts. The thing he often calls his own practice, his own sociology or asociology, is slokiology. MF Discord Kitten, uh, if you have any questions, you can ask. You can totally ask at any time. Feel free to. Even if you're behind, I will answer anything. I do not care. Um, but he often calls it slokiology because it is slow. It requires a lot of work. You can't take shortcuts with it. It's I'm at a loss for words. But it is something that he does, and he often says it is making sociology uh, uh, more of a science, not rejecting it as a science. Instead, accepting and embracing that sociology is itself a science, and that it can be on par even with the quote unquote hard sciences, and it's not all that different in the way we talk about things and the way we go about these things. If you read the Latour book, one of the things you'll notice, even when he's doing his narrative pieces, even when he's as I'll just say narrative pieces, even when he's introducing a fabricated story in with his work, you'll see most of the time what it is. And what is it mostly? It's mostly letters. It's mostly conversations between people, interviews he's done, talking to people. It's literally conversations that he's had trying to figure something out, talking about it, talking it through, and doing all that. It's good. What? You want us to put violence and reason, might and right, knowledge and power on the same plane? Yes, on the same plane. That is, as equally foreign to the functions of the Republic, such as the hypothesis of political ecology as recharacterized in this book. The struggle between reason and violence, the dispute between Socrates and the philosopher and Chylus, the sophist, the opposition between demonstration and persuasion, the pas de deux between realism and relativism, all that does not concern us and no longer has the vocation of summing up the history of our attachments. It is a dispute between elites to decide what will administer the death blow to the demos first, the staggering acceleration of natural law or the staggering acceleration of violence. To move on to the new Constitution, we have to abandon the help offered by those two shortcuts of public life. We have to replace capital S science with the sciences, and society with the slow work of political composition. It's not fucking violence or natural law that kills us. It's not the things. We have to do away with those. Oh my god. I forget I'm not doing wait. Okay. I forget I'm not doing like I was when I was reading Donna Haraway and I don't have the PDF open because I'm streaming this. What page was I on? 276, 279, something like that? 279? Yeah. And then footnote 3. Despite its claims, the discourse of power does not reveal the presence that is behind relations of force. It participates in it. See the conclusion. Critical discourse is completely molded by, in parentheses, political epistemology. It is the adopted son common to Socrates and Chylus. The notion of power, see for example, John Law, 1986. Here's the whole difference between critical sociology, which uses the notion of power as its principal weapon, and the sociology of criticism, which is interested in the sociologist's obsession with discourse in terms of power. In addition to the work of Boltanski and Thiele, 1991, see On the Anthropology of the Critical Gesture, Latour and Weibel, 2002. Do I know that book? I mean, do I know that paper? I think that might be the book. It might be his 2002 book about religious gestures. But I assume it's his paper, and I think that might have been written in 2002. I'm not sure. Um, and then 187. They do not blend together any more than they fight each other, as we have shown at length. We speak of the sciences in the plural and of politics in the singular. It is precisely because their functions are different, the former allowing us to maintain the diversity of the candidates for existence, the latter allowing us to keep on returning to the unity of what brings them together in a single collective. The old Constitution, in a word, did just the opposite. By speaking of science, capital S science in the singular, and political interest in the plural. Politics is thus opposed to the shortcuts of violence exactly to the same extent that it is opposed to the shortcuts of reason. By distinguishing between values and facts, the old regime enjoyed the advantages of a double transcendence. It could extricate itself from simple matters of fact by appealing to values, and it could always appeal against the outdated requirements of values and law to the harsh reality of facts. The new Constitution does not benefit from these transcendences. It can appeal to nothing other than the multiplicity of something that lies outside itself, without any more unity than legitimacy, and that puts the Constitution in danger, because the Constitution can never be free of it. The Constitution, the collective for Latour is always being changed. It is something that, as well, it is something that is always changing, always taking new things in. Uh, it's it's quite fascinating and also quite beautiful in the way Latour puts it. And for Latour, the reason why it's always in danger is because I assume because the Constitution can also change. Um, when Latour is talking about things, he often speaks of the danger of things, of the danger of losing something. Um, in a lot of his concepts, they aren't solid things; they are liquid things. They are things that can be that can change shape, um, and that is intentional. Um, to get to solid ground requires work, and that solid ground you have might not be solid forever. It might actually become liquid again. You might fall into it. You might have to do more work. Um, but it all requires work, always, forever. Um, kind of the thing. Um, Deprived of the help of transcendence, we at first believe we are going to suffocate for want of oxygen. Then we notice that we are breathing more freely than before. Transcendences abound in the propositions that are external to the collective. With its two explicitly convoked houses, the collective obliges us to slow down, that is, to represent again and again the pains of the progressive composition of the cosmos. The cosmos, the good common world. Um, kind of. I'm kind of uncertain of what he means by it. It's a term he gets from Isabel Stengers, and I haven't read Stenger's book that mentions it, so I'm not sure exactly. Um, he has a definition, but it's for me, it doesn't clarify things enough for me to feel it useful to say, useful to add. Instead of distinguishing between facts and rights as tradition demanded, it requires the facts that they become legitimate. It now distinguishes between the ill-formed amalgams of facts and rights and associations of humans and non-humans obtained according to due process. And then we'll go to footnote 4. 276. 277? 278? 279? 279. This has nothing to do, of course, with the legitimizing of the established facts, the power relations cherished by critical sociology, which believes it is making great advances by resuming the discourse of primary qualities and secondary qualities. Violence becomes the power of causal explanations invisible to the actors, while illusio spreads its mantle of arbitrary signification over the nakedness of power relations. Naturalization expands once again, this time on the courtyard side of society, and no longer on the garden side of nature. On the critique of legitimization, see Favreau, 2001. And then 185 maybe? I don't remember. And then I think we were on 179, 279. Yeah, okay, we're past this. Okay, we were on 187. We were not there. We were here. The only question that counts for it is the only question that counts for it is the scientific, political, moral, and administrative question. Are these propositions well articulated or not? Do they form a good or a bad common world? No longer suffices to exist in the upper house in order to exist in the lower house. No longer suffices to have been rejected by the lower house to cease to exist in the upper one. Provided that they work in a loop, the two assemblies have as their result the production at a given moment of provisional assemblies, be called a duly processed matter of concern, de facto de jure. So you want to entrust all morality, all truth, all justice to the simple passage from one version of collective to the following version? You would abandon certainties for groping, the great transcendence of the true and the good for the minuscule transcendence of hesitation in starting over. We'd have to be crazy to deprive ourselves of the appeal to reason that critical unveiling allows. Not crazy. We'd have to stop being modern. It's a good thing. We have never been modern. That's a reference. Latour is another book literally called We Had Never Been Modern. I don't want to explain matters of concern right now because they're really simple, but they're also not. So I'm not going to explain them. I'm going to gloss over them. Just know matters of concern are important as a thing, as what they are. Matters of concern are an important concept for Latour, but they're somewhat complicated, and I'll explain them later. If I feel I need to, I will explain them. Otherwise, I'm going to gloss over them because there's a lot to them. Times two arrows. From the beginning of this book, I've contrasted the expressions modernism and political ecology to such an extent that I sum up our trajectory with a parody of Hamlet. To modernize or to ecologize, that is the question. I literally, Pippa, the funny thing is, I actually have all of the things ready to make the Matters of Fact and Matters of Concern video, but I'm just not done getting all the things. I just need to get a few more things and I'll be good. A few more examples and I'll be good. And then I just need to put it all together. But I literally have basically everything. I just need to read the fucking paper of the summary of the which disaster was it? Which spaceship disaster was it? I always forget. I always confuse the two. But I just have to read the fucking paper on it. And that's literally it, and that's all I have to do. Not the... Was it the challenge? No, it wasn't the Challenger disaster. It was the one after that. Columbia. It was the Columbia. It was the Columbia. On the Columbia. I have to read the fucking report on the Columbia to get across another point. So I can get across another point. And that's it. And I just have to do it. That's all I have to do. And then I'm good. But I have literally everything. I have a Google Doc with everything. I have it posted on my I have it fucking posted on my Patreon. Like my script. And if you look at it, it is like complete. I literally have timestamps and everything for every single fucking video I do. I just need to read the paper and get stuff from there. And I want to get stuff from there. I just haven't read it because it's like 200 pages. And I have a lot to say about it. And I'm going to have a lot to say about it. I have to sort out what I have to say about it. That's why. I have given the adjective modern a term ordinarily used without reflection, a meaning that is, if not pejorative, then at least suspect. This may have surprised the reader. I could not explain it more fully earlier because its definition depended on the strange conception that the moderns have of capital S science and politics. It so happens the direction of what is called time's arrow derives from the relation between capital S science and society. I remember this. I remember this. And I think we're on 179. We're on 279. Which page are we on now? We're on 188. We're on 188. I think we're on 279. Yeah. In this section, I'm summarizing Latour 1993, Latour 1999b. Latour 1993 is Weird and Urban Modern, by the way. 188. And Latour 1990b is again Pandora's Hope, the namesake of my server. The moderns, they themselves say, are thrusting forward. What sign allows us to tell that they are progressing rather than going backward or running in place? Some feature has to allow them to differentiate the radiant future from the dark past. Now, it is from the classic relations between object and subject that they borrow the reference point that is going to serve as their check-off device. The past mixed together with the future will have to separate. In the past, our ancestors confused facts with values, the essence of things with the representations they had of things, harsh, objective reality with the fantasies that they projected onto reality, primary qualities with secondary qualities. Tomorrow, the moderns are sure the distinction will be sharper. We shall be able to pry the established facts more decisively away from their matrix of desires and human fantasies. For the moderns, without the hope of a capital S science, at last extracted from the social world, there is no discernible movement, no progress, no arrow of time, and thus no hope of salvation. We can understand that they devote desperate energy to defending the myth of the cave, that they see in the confusion of the sciences with politics the unpardonable crime that would deprive history of any future. If science can no longer exit the prison of the social, then there is no longer any possible emancipation. Freedom has no more future than does reason. It is all this temporal machinery, this time factory, this clock, this time clock that political ecology has to attack in full awareness of what it is doing. It has to modify the mechanism that generates the difference between the past and the future. It has to suspend the tick-tock that gave the temporality of the moderns its rhythm. What I could not even attempt to do at the beginning of this book without shocking common sense now presents little difficulty. It is a matter of replacement parts. On what machinery did the promise and expected distinction between facts and values actually depend? We now know. On the reduction of two types of exteriorities, one used as a reservoir and the other as a dumping ground. The front of modernization advanced inexorably, going outside the social to seek an indisputable common world that served as its reservoir. in order to substitute it for the proliferations of opinions, projections, representations, fantasies that were now driven out of the real world and pushed into a vast dump, a cemetery filled with archaisms and irrationality. Moving forward under this regime thus consisted of filling the collective with indisputable matters of fact, primary qualities, and eliminating secondary qualities from the real world, confining them to the inner world, to the past, or at least to insignificance and inessentiality. This immense intake and outlet pump, taking in indisputable facts and forcing out disputable opinions, is recognizable. It is nature turned into our political enemy. If any of you have read Factish Gods, you will recognize this immediately. The vacuum and the suction pump is the thing he's doing again. He's also made similar arguments in Factish Gods. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the page number. 279, right? Right? Yeah, right. Let me recall that the expression political enemy no longer has the meaning of subhuman, lecherous viper, or some other insult, but that it is henceforth used as a term of respect. What endangers the collective tomorrow may be an ally tomorrow, and morality, which salvages those who have been excluded, is in no way at stake. Are we on 190? No, we aren't. The machine for producing modern times relies on an ever-increasing naturalization. That is, as we have seen, on an ever more rapid avoidance of the legitimate procedures through which essences have to be instituted. A bombardment of objects out of nowhere and not made by human hands pushes representations ever further back into archaism. An extraordinary ambition modernized the planet to the point of making all trace of rationality disappear, replaced by untouchable reason. Curiously, modern history ends up resembling the very bad film Armageddon. An objective missile, a comet from the outer reaches of the galaxy, will soon put an end to all human quarrels by turning the Earth into glass. What it hopes for as its salvation, as its final deliverance, is an apocalypse of objectivities raining fire on the collective. Back to 279 for note 7. Now we're on page 190. One might wonder about the link between the crimes and cataclysms of the century that has just ended and this suicidal and apocalyptic conception. At bottom, the moderns always desire their own disappearance, the disappearance of their own oikos. Their grudge is not against nature, it is against themselves. The moderns imagine the radiant future as the definitive elimination of everything human and non-human. The Platonic fire from the heaven of ideas finally irradiates the dark cave which melts under its brilliance. A strange myth of a cataclysmic end of history for a political regime that pretends to give lessons in reason and morality to hapless and ignorant politicians. Political ecology, for its part, knows neither reservoir nor dumping ground. The intake and outlet pump turns out to be jammed, pretty much rusted out beyond repair. As a result, it can no longer put into effect the difference between the rational and the irrational, between the indisputable fact of nature and the merely social representation. Political ecology will thus never be able to push the cursor of time little by little along an irreversible line that would go from a confused past to a more enlightened future. Theoretically, ecology, the one that first took back from the moderns their conception of nature and the corresponding conception of time, has of course tried its hand at this. It first believed that by introducing the concern for nature into politics, it could finally put an end to human waste, exploitation, and irrationality. Disguised as a revolutionary bend in the road, this was nevertheless only a matter of accelerating modern times. Nature dictates its law to history still more imperiously than it had done in the past. What is more, historicity itself which is appearing, confused with the movement of nature. No, decidedly, political ecology can no longer make the clock of the moderns work, no matter how revolutionary the latter claim to be, for it has chosen to stop constructing its public life around the distinction between facts and values, the only cog capable up to now of carving out a truly lasting, irreversible, progressive difference between yesterday and today. Must political ecology then refrain from plunging into history? Must it abandon forward movement for want of being modern? Must it resign itself to the postmoderns running in place? Or worse, still as it goes the other direction on the modern's path, will it have to accept the designation reactionary? No, of course not. For while it does not have either the reservoir or the dumping ground of the old regime, it possesses other transcendences, an exteriority constructed according to a well-formed procedure that produced provisional excluded entities and postulants. It is thus quite capable of showing a difference between past and future, but it obtains that difference by way of the gap between two successive iterations, no longer by way of the old distinction between facts and values. Yesterday, it might say, we took into account only a few propositions. Tomorrow, we shall take others into account, and if all goes well, even more. Yesterday, we gave too much importance to entities whose weight will decrease tomorrow. In the past, we composed a common world with only a few elements. In the future, we shall be able to absorb the shock of a large number of beings that were incommensurable before now. Yesterday, we could not form a cosmos, and we found ourselves surrounded by aliens that no one had formed. The former reservoir that no one could integrate, the former dumping ground. Tomorrow, we shall form a slightly less misshapen cosmos. The difference isn't that things are better put together now and they're more put together later. The difference now is what the collective looks like. The collective is always being reshaped, reformed. It is always taking new shapes, new forms. It is always bringing things in, taking things out, changing things, instituting new essences, doing all these things. And that's how you tell the past from the future. In that way. We have changed futures at the same time as we changed exteriors. We have modified the exterior because the political institutions inscribed in the Constitution have been overturned. Whereas the moderns always went from the confused to the clear, from the mixed to the simple, from the archaic to the objective, and since they were thus always climbing the stairway of progress, we too are going to progress, but by always descending along a path that is, however, not the path of decadence. We shall always go from the mixed to the still more mixed, from the complicated to the still more complicated, from the explicit to the implicit. We no longer expect from the future that it will emancipate us from all our attachments. On the contrary, we expect that it will attach us with tighter bounds to more numerous crowds of aliens who have become full-fledged members of the collective, that is, in the process of being formed. Tomorrow, the moderns cry, we shall be more detached. Tomorrow, murmur those who have to be called non-moderns. We shall be more attached. Oh, sorry. 270, not 290. Or wait, 279. For want of a better term, Beck proposes reflexive or second modernization. 190. Wait, where was I? Was I on 191 actually? I was on 191 actually. I confused myself. Mark Twain declared that nothing was certain but death and taxes. From now on, we shall have to add another certainty. Tomorrow, the collective will be more intricate than it was yesterday. We shall indeed have to involve ourselves still more intimately with the existence of a still larger multitude of human and non human beings, whose demands will still be more incommensurable with those of the past, but nevertheless have to become capable of sheltering them in a common dwelling. I didn't mean to do that. We no longer expect a rain of fire that would put us all in agreement by killing off everything through the force of objectivity. There was no end to our history. The arrow of the moderns was the only thing that presupposed the end of history. Since gradually becoming a cosmos has no end, there is thus, for political ecology, no apocalypse to fear. It comes back home to the oikos, to ordinary dwellings, to banal existence. Yeah, I thought the cosmos never ended. I thought the cosmos was a weird thing. Um, but I wasn't sure. I'm never sure. I always worry that I'm making assumptions about things, but I assumed. Not content just to put an end to the history of the moderns, political ecology also suppresses the strangest of of that history's aberrations by offering it, retrospectively, an entirely different explanation of its destiny. The moderns, while they were obsessed by time, had actually never had any luck with it. For to make their vast machinery work, they needed to place the world of indisputable matters of fact outside history. They have never found the way, for example, to institute an even slightly credible history of the sciences. They have settled under the name for a history of humans discovering an indisputable and atemporal nature. And then we go back. And then we go back to 179. We're at 192. And then we go. Wait, sorry, 279. And then we go. This is the meaning of the past perfect tense in the expression, we have never been modern. It is a question not of one more illusion, but of an active interpretation of the history of the West, which has had a formidable performative effect, but which is gradually losing its effectiveness, which thus obliges us to reinterpret the past, a phenomenon that is in its turn quite banal. The very moment when Descartes, sitting all alone by a stove, formulates his ego cogito, as we can see now, the scientific community finally begins to work in concert. What is modern? The solitary cogito, the common work of proof workers, or the strange relation between the invention of the cogito and the scientific community? At the very moment when the community is inventing itself, the retrospective discovery by the new history of the sciences, the countless links between the sciences and public life, between those links and their denial, offer the most spectacular proof that we have never been modern. Even in our dreams, especially in our dreams. The moderns were thus caught in a dilemma that they expelled to the outside like all the rest, that ended up, like all the rest, catching up with them. They went forward with the hope of taking into account fewer and fewer propositions, whereas they had set in motion, in the course of several centuries, the most formidable machine for stirring up the greatest possible number of entities, cultures, nations, facts, sciences, peoples, arts, animals, industries, in an immense shambles they never stopped mobilizing or destroying at the moment when they were asserting their desire to simply purify, naturalize, and exclude. They got rid of the rest of the world at the very moment when they were taking the world, Atlas like, on their broad shoulders. They claimed to be externalizing everything precisely when they were internalizing the whole earth. Imperialists, they declared that they depended on no one, indebted to the entire universe. They thought they were free of any liaison. Implicated everywhere, in up to their ears, they wanted to wash their hands of all responsibility. When the moderns, God's equals, finally became coextensive with creation, they chose that moment to fall into the most complete isolationism and to believe that they had exited from history. It is hardly astonishing that their clock stopped at the same time that their bicameralism was collapsing, crushed under the weight of all those that they had recruited, even as they claimed they were not taking them into account or offering them a common world. If there is a lesson to be drawn from the myth of Frankenstein, it is exactly the opposite, the one drawn by Victor, the unhappy maker of the infamous monster. At that moment when he is proclaiming his guilt and shedding crocodile tears for having played sorcerer's apprentice with his misguided innovation, he dissimulates under this venal sin, a venial sin, the mortal sin of which his creature rightly accuses him. Fleeing from the laboratory and abandoning the creature to itself on the pretext that, like all innovation, it was born monstrous. No one can take himself for God and not then send his only son to try to salvage the great project so badly begun of fallen creation. And then back to 180. We go to 10. Oh, sorry, back to 280. Back to 280. On the interpretation of the myth and its illustration, see Latour, 1996a, which is Aramis, or the love of technology. Sorry I'm not adding too much. I feel like Latour's just good. If you guys have questions, you can ask, but otherwise, I don't entirely feel like I need to explain certain things. He's kind of just making his own point. Feels pretty obvious. Latour feels very clear. If he isn't clear, you can totally just ask, and I'll always answer. I usually have answers. Political ecology does better than serve as a successor to modernism. It disinvents modernism. It sees retrospectively in this contradictory movement of attachment and detachment a much more interesting history than the one in which a front of modernization advances inexorably from the darkness of archaism to the brightness of objectivity, and much richer, of course, the anti-narrative of the anti-moderns. You read the story according to the equally inexorable trend toward a decadence that is claimed to have drawn us further and further from a rich, warm matrix to hurl us into the frozen world of mere calculations. The moderns have always done the opposite of what they said. This is what saves them. There is not one thing that is not also an assembly, a ding. Not a single one of the indisputable facts that is not the result of a meticulous discussion at the very heart of the collective. Not one matter of fact that does not drag behind it a long train of unexpected consequences that come to haunt the collective by obliging it to reshape itself. Not one innovation that does not redefine cosmopolitics from top to bottom by obliging everyone to recompose public life. Not once in their short history have moderns known how to distinguish facts from values, things from assemblies. Not once have they managed to render insignificant and unreal what they thought they could exclude for good and without due process. They have believed themselves irreversible without ever managing to make anything irreversible. All those appellants remain behind them, around them, before them, in them, like creditors who are knocking at the door, demanding only that the work of inclusion and exclusion be taken up again on new bases and explicitly. The very moment when they weep because they live in a world indifferent to the anxiety, they are still living in this republic where they were born in quite the ordinary way. Political ecology thus does not condemn the modern experience, does not annihilate it, does not revolutionize it. It surrounds it, envelops it, fills it to overflowing, embeds it in a procedure that finally gives it its meaning. Let us put this in moral terms. Political ecology pardons the modern experience with a tender, merciful gentleness. It recognizes that there may not have been any way to do better. It agrees under certain conditions to wipe the slate clean. Despite the frightening burden of guilt they are fond of dragging behind them, the moderns have not yet committed the mortal sin of Victor Frankenstein. They would commit one, however, if they were to put off until later this reinterpretation of their experience that political ecology is offering them, and if, seeing themselves surrounded by such a crowd of aliens, they were to panic, prolonging even further this modernist definition of the present time. They were to believe they were living in a society surrounded by a nature. If finally they were to imagine themselves capable of obstinately modernizing the planet. Up to now, naive, perhaps even innocent, they would run a serious risk of being caught by the proverb, persevere diabolicum est. I don't know what that means. I don't speak your silly Latin language. To err is human, but to persist in error is diabolical. Is what I think it translates to. I'm not actually sure, but I think that sounds right. That seems right. Yeah. Yay. How long is the learning curve? We might go for another one. No, I didn't want to do that. Give me X. All right. We should do the learning curve. I want to do the learning curve. We've only been going for an hour 16. So, MF Discord kitten. I don't know if you're in Sunday's Discord, but if you are, I have my own Discord. You can join it, and you can add me, and you can ask me any questions you want. I do not give a fuck. I will talk to you for hours. Someone asked me about a book by Donna Haraway, and they were like 40 pages into the book, and I hadn't read the book before, and I fucking picked up the book, and I spent like 3 hours reading up to that point in the book just to make sure that I said something that was right to them. So, if you have any questions, I will gladly be happy to answer it, and I will gladly be happy to do anything with you if you need help. I do not care. That's what we do. That's what I do. The learning curve. In our quiver, we have not just one of time's arrows, but two. The first modernist, which goes towards detachment. The second, non-modern, which goes towards reattachment. The first deprives us little by little of our ingredients for building our collective, since essences based on nature are more and more indisputable, and identities based on arbitrariness are less and less disputable. The second arrow of time, in contrast, gradually it multiplies the transcendences to which the collective can appeal, in order to take up again at the next stage what it meant by rearticulating the propositions, by offering them other habits. We have to go over what habits are now. Yay! I'm just gonna go to the thing because I forget how to explain it. I know what it means, but I sometimes know what things mean, but I don't know the words for things. If that makes sense. So, properties of propositions. Before the operation of the collective have instituted them in a lasting way as essences. This is the only way one can carry out the task involved in elaborating the common world without immediately running up against the indisputable nature and indisputable identities and interest. Also, sorry guys, my cat decided to go on my lap, so she might mess with things. So if anything fucks up, blame her. I didn't do it. Where were we? Yeah, okay, we were 194, bottom. Political ecology thus does not share in the same history as that of modern progress. We are going to be able to entrust treasures to the new temporality that multiplies the potential allies it would have been crazy to entrust to the old historicity. Formerly, one always had to mistrust history, for the important things, common world, primary qualities, eluded temporality. If there were a human history full of sounds and fury, it was always developing in contrast with a silent non-history, full of promises of peace that were always slow to manifest themselves because of the infinite distance that separated them from this lowly world. Boop boop boop. Back to 280 and not 180 because that's the wrong page. I leave entirely aside here the possibility of historicizing nature by telling a more lively story of its development, since this new liveliness doesn't modify the political use made of nature. 195. As soon as we agree to differentiate the past from the future, no longer through detachment but through reattachment, political ecology begins to profit differently from the passage of time. Unlike the other forms of historicity that preceded it, it can confide the questions it has been unable to answer today to the restarting, tomorrow, of the process of composition. It need not claim that the things it does not know at time t are non-existent, irrational, and definitively outdated, but only that they are provisionally excluded beings on the path toward appeal, and that it will find these beings in any event on its way to t plus 1, since it will never be rid of them. In other words, it no longer uses any of the three labels the modern have always used up to now to characterize their development. I lost my place. The struggle against archaism, the front of modernization, the utopia of a radiant future. It is required to devote itself to a meticulous triage of the possible worlds, the cosmograms, always to become anew. Irreversibility has changed direction. No longer it finds itself in the abolished past, but in the future to be recommenced. $280. The accusation of historicism appeared condemnable only in the old regime, by contrast with the assured certainties that could always be opposed to the world of the cave. It is no longer a matter here of entrusting everything to mere contingency, but of modifying the meaning of that word through adequate institutions. Contingent becomes once again the result of a political reapportionment with regard to what may or may not be, what must or what must be or must not be. Stay still, cat. You're messing me up. Let us retain from the sciences the word experiment, to characterize the movement through which every collective passes in this way, from a past state to a future state, from good sense to common sense. Public life has striven up to now to imitate capital S science and to await the salvation of reason. Why would it not try to imitate the sciences a bit by borrowing the experimentation that is incontestably their greatest invention? An experiment, as etymology attests rather well, consists in passing through a trial and coming out of it in order to draw its lessons. Back to 180. Sorry, back to 280. I did it again. I'm not reutilizing the distinction between experimentum and experimentia, experiment and experience, since common sense, caught up increasingly in the science words, needs experimentation as well as experienced people from now on. $195. It thus offers an intermediary between knowledge and ignorance, defines itself not by the knowledge that is available at the start, by the quality of the learning curve that has made it possible to pass through a trial and to know a little more about it. Experiments, as any researcher worthy the name knows quite well, are difficult, uncertain, risky, and never allow recourse to reliable witnesses who would be available from a catalog, as it were. They can fail, they're difficult to reproduce, they depend on instruments. A bad experiment is not one that fails, but one from which the researcher has drawn no lesson that will help prepare the next experiment. A good experiment is not one that offers some definitive knowledge, but one that has allowed the researcher to trace the critical path along which it will be necessary to pass the following iteration will not be carried out in vain. To use the notions of experimentation and learning curve advisedly, we must of course take them out of laboratories and share them with the whole set of these beings, humans and non-humans, who turn out to be involved in them. Up to now, under the modernist regime, experiments were undertaken, but among scientists alone. All the others, often in spite of themselves, became participants in an enterprise they lacked the means to judge. We shall say, then, the collective as a whole is defined from now on as a collective experimentation. Experimentation on what? On the attachments and detachments that are going to allow it at a given moment to identify the candidates for common existence, to decide whether those candidates can be situated within the collective, or whether they must, according to due process, become provisional enemies. The entire collective has to ask itself whether it can cohabitate with so-and-so and at what price. The entire collective has to inquire into the trials that will allow it to decide whether it is right or wrong to carry out that addition or subtraction. The deliberations of the collective must no longer be suspended or short-circuited by some definitive knowledge, since nature no longer gives any right that would be contrary to the exercise of public life. The collective does not claim to know, but it has to experiment in such a way that it can learn in the course of the trial. Its entire normative capacity depends henceforth on the difference that is going to be able to register between T0 and T plus 1, while entrusting its fate to the small transcendence of external realities. We shall be told that the norm at stake here is a very fragile one. The entire characterization of history cannot be entrusted as such a weak difference to a mere delta of learning. But with respect to what standard would one judge the weakness of this norm? If it is by contrast with the definitive knowledge supplied by objective familiarity with the nature of things, it is thus saying that mere collective experience appears very slight. This is what Socrates relentlessly insisted in the Agora in Athens. We have become aware, however, that no matter how useful it may be, this standard can never become commensurable with the tasks of the collective. The common world has to be built on a life-size scale in real time, with knowledge of causes and consequences in the middle of the Agora, with all those who are its concerned parties. Back to 280. 14. These are the four conditions offered by Callias for political action and rejected as irrelevant by Socrates in the Gorgias. Are we on 176 or 175? Don't answer that. We're on 186. Wait. We're on 195. It might have been on 196. I might have been wrong. I kept saying wrong numbers. Okay, we might have been on 197. Yeah, okay, we were. Just wrong. I'm just wrong. Public life, as we have seen, cannot unfold except on condition that every thread of salvation, every hope of sudden simplification be withdrawn. By comparison with the blinding clarity of the heaven of ideas, the notion of successful experiment may appear obscure, but by comparison to the total obscurity that reigns in the hell of the cave, the learning curve offers a certain light. The only one we have, the only one we need in order to grope around blindly in the company of people who cannot see very well. becomes easier to characterize the dynamics of the collective if we agree to judge it by the yardstick of collective experimentation, rather than by the yardstick, in principle a better one, but in practice inapplicable, of the old regime. We come back first to the question of ecology itself, superficial or deep, scientific or political, sophisticated or popular, which is the origin of this book. As I have often noted, we no longer have to define once and for all the bonds that would regulate relations between humans and things. In particular, we no longer have to substitute for so-called political and anthropocentric bonds an order of things, a natural hierarchy that would array entities by order of importance from the greatest, Gaia, Mother Earth, to the smallest, a human being whipped into a frenzy by his hubris. On the contrary, we can benefit from the fundamental discovery of the ecology movement. No one knows what an environment can do. No one can define in advance what a human being is, detached from what makes him be. Back to 280. We're on 197, bottom of the page. Lovelock, the inventor of the Gaia hypothesis, is quite careful, moreover, not to make this an already constituted totality. His book lays out the progressive composition of the links between scientific disciplines, each charged with a sector of the planet and gradually discovering with surprise they can define one another mutually. By forcing the issue, we can say that Lovelock's Gaia is the complete opposite of nature, and it bears closer resemblance to a parliament of disciplines. Bottom 197. No power has been given by nature the right to decide on the relative importance in the respective hierarchy of entities that compose at any given moment the common world. But what no one knows, anyone can experiment with, so long as he or she agrees to take the path of testing or respecting the procedures that specifically avoid shortcuts. For the same reason, we can speak about morality without finding ourselves paralyzed by the question of foundations. The name of what must In the name of what must wolves be preferred to bison? In the name of what must wolves be preferred to bison in Yosemite National Park? In the name of what principle must the sheep named Dolly be forbidden to photocopy herself in thousands of clones? What duty obliges us to reserve the water of the river? Drome? Drome? I'm just going to say drome. For fish as opposed to using it to irrigate cornfields subsidized by Europe. We no longer have to oscillate between the irrefragable right of humans, extended or not by their future generations, and the indisputable rights of things themselves to enjoy existence. The question becomes whether or not we have caught the totality of these beings in our nets: sheeps, farmers, wolves, trout, farm supports, and wandering streams. If we have, then we now have to conduct experiments on the compatibility of all these propositions, these cosmograms, by discovering through another trial how the assemblage is going to resist if one excludes a single one of its members. What will Yosemite become, for example, without wolves? What is a fish without water? What is a producer of corn without a protected market? In contrast, if some entities are missing, to start the work of collection all over again. Morality has changed direction. It obliges us not to define foundations, but to recommence the process of composition while moving as quickly as possible to the next iteration. The foundations are not to be found behind us, beneath us, or above us, but ahead of us. Catching up with them is our future, as we place the collective in a state of alert, to register as quickly as possible the appeal of the excluded entities that no morality ever again authorizes us to exclude definitively. Every experiment produces arrears that will have to be paid one day. We can never call it quits. It would be sinful to suspend the learning curve for good, even or especially in the name of the intangible moral principles that would define humanity once and for all without due process. Humanism, too, must become experimental. Back to 280. 16. The distinction between procedural, substantial, and consequential moralities become less important if we consider the collective in its experimental dynamics. Look at them more closely, we see that the different schools of moral philosophy do not oppose one another, so much as each designates successive segments of this learning curve while making an effort to characterize its virtue. 198, bottom of the page, right? Yeah. By entrusting the concern for finding its way to experimentation, making morality a path of trials, the collective also gets itself out of a difficulty that might paralyze it as it has paralyzed theoretical ecology, which has been confronted abruptly without mediation by the obligation to take everything into account. It seems indeed that in passing from modernism to political ecology, we pass from the imprescriptible right to ignore the majority of beings and the necessity of excluding none of them. Complexity, total connectivity, the global ecosystem, the Catholicity that wants to embrace everything. All this is what always seems to accompany the erecting of an ecological way of thinking, a way of thinking rightly persuaded that in the final analysis, everything is interconnected. By comparison with this magnificent goal, every collective appears cramped, ignorant, closed. Yet the little transcendence of experimentation promises not to take everything into account, but to exclude while assuring itself that the excluded entities will be able to put it in danger and appeal to it in the following phase. Experimentation is thus asked not to swallow the pluriverse in a single mouthful, but to ensure that it is indeed proceeding from a state in to a state in plus one, that takes into account a great number of beings, or that at least does not lose too many beings along the way. The order and beauty that the Greek language associates with the word cosmos does not apply to the totality, but to the learning curve. By definition, all collectives, like Frankenstein's creatures, are born deformed. All appear barbarous in others' eyes. Only the trajectory of the experiment gives them a civil form. The provisional totality that is composed according to due process is in no way to be confused with the totality obtained in a house or laboratory under the name of totalizing an infinitely complex nature. Gaia is not Mother Earth, a divine ancestor from whom our collective supposedly descends, but at best a remote great-grandniece, whom only a civilized collective will be able to generate according to due process. By comparing the relative states of the same collective at two successive moments, we thus succeed in characterizing its virtue, without falling back on definitive knowledge or moral transcendence either, without wanting to embrace everything all at once. With the notion of learning curve, in other words, we solve a problem of scale. While anyone can work on a small-scale model in the laboratory at any time, once they have left the lab, we always have to grapple with the collective at full size, without being able to wait or repeat the experiment or reduce the scale, without being able to accumulate knowledge of the causes and consequences of our actions. And then back to 280 and round 17, bottom of page 199. That there is no reduced model of the collective is the origin of the chief misunderstanding between Socrates and the Demos in Gorgias. 199, bottom of the page. No reduction of the collective is possible. That is why nothing can replace the experiment that must be always carried out without certainties. Now, collective experimentation outlines an intermediate path between the reduced and full-scale models, and it allows us to deploy the passage from one to the other over time. On the condition, however, that we keep track of the path we have taken. A new mechanism has to be ready to record at each moment the successive responses given the now reopened question of the number of collectives by constantly comparing what we've been able to absorb and what remains outside. Yay! We freaking did it. We got to the... We read... like, I think 16 pages. Maybe. Something like that. Read some pages. We'll probably end here today. Okay, Discord. Yeah. Okay. But Dark FB is still with us. Well, Dark FBK. This may be the end of the stream, but you are still always, um, if you would like, I'll at you in chat as well if you don't respond. But you're always welcome to join the Discord and ask me questions or ask me anything or ask me about anything or yell at me or something. I don't care. I'll answer whatever. It's what I do. Latour is my guy. I would probably normally have a lot more to say. Maybe I wouldn't, but I usually do. I usually have a lot to say about this stuff, but this is the first time I've read this book, and when I read a book for the first time, I'm kind of still forming my thoughts. If you go back earlier in the streams, I actually have a lot to say, but as it progresses into stuff that I've never experienced with Latour, I kind of just let Latour speak for himself, and I don't have much to say at that moment. Um, and I also don't want to impose my own ideas onto Latour. I worry about that, but so I try not to. But unless I'm like really certain of what I'm saying. But yeah, I have a Discord. If you want to join that, you can. And post a link in chat. I'll do that. I'll actually do that. You know what? You know what? I'll do that. That's what I'll do. How do I invite? No, that's the wrong thing. I don't go to server settings. That's stupid. That's silly. You're silly. You click the invite people button. It's literally right there. There's the Discord link. So if anyone wants to join, they can. I hope you've all enjoyed this. We've been going for an hour 42 now. So yeah. I will be ending stream now. They'll probably be joining my Discord chat channel. I think. Yeah, that's probably what I'll do. I'll be joining the Discord chat, my little Discord chat on my server. So bye everyone.